Hello? Yeah, sorry.
Hello? Is it audible? Is it audible? Thanks. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So, anyone has any idea what this talk is going to be about? I mean, what is the broader area that we're going to cover today in this talk? Louder? Yes. Yeah, that's like the broadest of all things you can say. It's theoretical computer science. And you've had a couple of lectures in theoretical computer science before, right? In the same week. Did you notice some particular thing that was common in all the lectures that was being talked about in really all the lectures? Something. It was, pardon? Okay. Yes, P and NP. But probably, was it covered in the intro thing? The intro lecture, was it? I'm not sure. But anyways, yeah, fine. Yes, P and NP. And what do we learn from P and NP classification? I mean, what is the thing that comes up that drives our attention? Pardon? Yes, solving particular problems, and mainly we're interested in NP hard problems, right? They are like the problems all of us are suddenly very interested in because we know that we can't solve, and human nature, we try to solve them. Okay, so we're going to be no different. We're going to follow the trends. We also talk about hardness, like it has been talked about in all the theoretical computer science talks. And in fact, we are going to begin with hardness, and just for the sake of completeness, I'll start with the elementary things. I'm sure you would have done that before. You would have by now, you would have had a clear image of what it is, but we'll just recap it so that it's fresh in your mind, because maybe when we reach the end of the talk, we might need them. We might need them to appreciate what we are actually doing, what we are doing, okay? So, just for the sake of completeness, this picture by now I think everyone knows. Just to repeat, there is this class called T, which represents all the problems which we think are, which for us are efficiently solvable, right? We think whatever is, okay, sorry. Okay. We think whatever is in P, we don't think whatever is in P can be solved in polynomial time, and for us polynomial means it's efficient and we are happy with it, right? But unfortunately not all problems, sorry. Okay. But unfortunately not every problem is efficiently solvable, and there are some problems which are not in P, which we call the NP. And all we know about these problems as of now is, given a solution, given a candidate solution, I can in polynomial time test whether this is the solution for the problem or not. But I cannot find a solution, right? This is all we know. So there is also an equivalent definition of P and NP in terms of Turing machines. If you would have done a course in Turing machine, right? P is the class of all those problems, or the class of all those languages which are accepted by a deterministic Turing machine. And NP is the class of all those problems that are accepted by a non-deterministic Turing machine, right? This is okay. Now starts the fun part, the part that we're interested in. There's something called NP hard. For that matter, for every set of problems, for any class of problems, we can define a class of problems that are hard for it. It's like NP is just a class of problems, right? Many of you would know, all problems do not fall under only these classes. There are classes beyond that, and there are problems who fall in those classes also. And then for any problem, we can define a class of hard problems for it. For example, the class of hard problems for NP are the NP hard problems. And what is the characteristic of that hard problem? The characteristic of that hard problem is, if you can solve that hard problem in time, which is determined by this base class, then you can solve all the problems in this corresponding class for which those problems are hard. In this setting, if you can solve even one problem in NP hard class, then you can solve all in polynomial time, because we're working in this polynomial framework, if we can solve any one problem in NP-hard class, we can solve all the, in polynomial time, we can solve all the NP problems in polynomial time, right? And since there's this conjecture, right, P not equal to NP, and we widely believe it, we widely follow it, we don't expect that to happen. We don't expect an NP-hard problem to have a polynomial solution, because otherwise the NP and P would collapse, right? And in this whole setting, there's something called NP-complete problems. They're nothing. Nothing as in, they are the hard problems, plus they have an additional feature that they belong to the class also. For example, a hard problem for a class may not belong to the class. I mean, I just said that these are the problems. Someone said something? These are the problems such that if I can solve this in a polynomial time, I can solve this also in polynomial time. I didn't say anything about whether this is an NP or not, whether given a solution I can check it in polynomial time or not, right? But this class comes with that guarantee also, that additional guarantee that you can also, it's hard for the class, plus given a solution I can check it in polynomial time whether it is it's a solution for the problem or not. Fine. This is like just a review. Now, the part that we have been hearing in all the lectures, hard problems exist, so what? And we know if P is not equal to NP, we cannot do anything better than brute force algorithms. And we know brute force algorithms takes time, which is something like C power f of n, where f of n is, where f of n is like some function of n and C could be anything. C could also be a function of n, but what's more catching to our eyes is this f of n is like in the exponent, right? So as n increases, this function increases asymptotically fast, so this is like not a good thing for us, okay? But then, as we know, there exist hard problems, we have to solve them and all those, that story. So what do experts do? I mean, for us, we want our problems to be solved efficiently, right? But we know that can't be done, but we want it, right? So, in some sense, we do some kind of a cheating. I mean, you have seen many algorithms till now of hard problems that were actually running in polynomial time. And you know it's not possible, right? And therefore, there's some cheating going on between. Or maybe if you want to put it more gently, there is like, you're doing some compromise. You're making some compromise on the way to get an efficient algorithm. Otherwise, it's not possible, right? And interestingly, it's more interesting and exciting to come up with clever cheats than to ponder about the problem which is like which we cannot hope to solve. Okay, so it's like an interesting thing. Okay, so now what kind of cheating algorithms, not cheating techniques, or what kind of tools have you seen to attack hard problems? What kind of tools have you seen using which you have been able to solve hard problems efficiently? Yes, approximation is one thing. Randomization, yeah. So, okay. So, you've definitely seen these two things. Can anyone tell me what were the kind of compromise that you made when you were making approximation algorithms? I mean, what was the where did you compromise? You have compromised, right? Yes. So we actually compromise on the size of the solution, right? We were talking about optimization problems and we wanted the minimum or the maximum, but we couldn't get them, and we said, okay, don't give me the minimum, but give me something that is like a factor of the optimal, right? This was the kind of compromise that you made. In randomized, what was the kind of compromise that you made? You made a compromise on the correctness of the solution. You say that my algorithm will give me the solution, will give me correct solution, but it will not give me correct solution always. There are chances that it could fail, right? So these are the compromises that you made. So today also we are gonna see a kind of a cheating technique, a cheating toolkit to solve hard problems. And of course, it's a cheating thing. We have to make some compromise in some sense. Let's see what it is. It's a new paradigm, or you can just say it's a new cheat sheet. Okay, and it's called parameterization. What is it and why is it? We'll come to it. First, let's get some motivation about, you know, why are we interested in certain kind of things. Okay, this exact thing was something that was missing in both approximation and randomization, right? You couldn't guarantee an exact analysis. Approximation didn't give you an exact solution, and randomized didn't give you an exact guarantee about the correctness of the solution, right? But there are situations where you need exact solutions, right? For example, there are situations when you're tight on budget and you're like, okay, I have this budget and I cannot afford to spend anything more than that, anything strictly more than that, right? In that case, approximation, even if approximation tells you, okay, I'll not tell you to spend a lot, but I'll tell you to spend at least 2 times, 3 times, even that is not fine for me because I'm very strict on budget. There are problems, right? So in those cases, approximations can't be done. And randomization, of course, safety critical situations. If you have to install some software in, say, airlines and all those things, you can't afford to install a randomized algorithm there. I mean, you can't say, okay, with 0.11% probability it can crash and okay, we'll let it be. We can't do that, right? So there are situations where we actually need an exact analysis. And this kind of technique, a paradigm called this parameterization, which we'll explore soon, helps in exact analysis. Another driving force behind the theory of parameterization is like these things. So these computer scientists, which have a practical orientation, they rather crib about the kind of analysis theoreticians do. In a sense, they think that we are really unbiased towards the type of input that we have. The type of input, and it's like important, okay? What do? We are like, given any problem, okay, this is the input, we try to see it in the most general way. Like, we don't want to skip any corner case. We like to interpret the input in the most general way and want to come up with some algorithms, right? But in practice, really, in practical, is it the case? I mean, every input, when you're actually implementing an algorithm in a practical situation, every input comes from a source, right? And that source cannot generate anything arbitrary. The input in some sense has a structure. We'll see some examples of it. But I mean, this is kind of the building of the whole theme, okay? And then, I don't know, many of you would have heard about SAT solvers. These are like softwares which are used in industry. So the SAT problem you all know is NP-complete, right? But there are softwares called SAT solvers who actually take as input SAT instances and give you outputs, and they're doing really well as in they're running efficiently. Why is it? It's like, so there is some kind of a paradox here, right, between theory and practice. So what is it that they try to explore? It's just that, the fact is just that, I mean, they work in specific instances where they know that the input is like, you know, it has some structure or some special thing is there in the input, right? They just try to explore it, and I think the kind of difference that we'll be doing, that we'll be talking about today, and the kind of things which are implemented there are, maybe what they do are heuristics. So they're not very formally analyzed and all those things, but what we'll be giving today are not heuristics. We have a formal theory, like approximation, like randomization. We give a formal theory to do such things, to do things that run well in practice, at least in practical situations or in more realistic situations, okay? Okay. So the main motivation is this. Inputs are not arbitrary. They come with small is important here. They come with small structures, budgets or parameters. For example, so we had these election kind of things, right? So there are a lot of people who do polling about elections, like who will win and who will not. So how are these things done? So there is this whole population, right? Whole population. So you don't go to every person and, you know, ask what are your views and all those things. So you actually sample a population, and then from that sample you try to analyze some things, right? Now, okay, do you know what is a good sample? A good sample is which is scattered, right? Which is scattered. So it doesn't pick I mean, for example, it doesn't take a lot of people from the same community because the thoughts will be like the same, right? So a good input in such situations will be a very scattered input, okay? Now look at that input, okay? So input means we have a lot of people there, okay? Let us try to construct a relationship graph on that input. What is a relationship graph? There are people and I put an edge between them if they know each other or they are friends with each other, kind of a thing, okay? What do you think is a special structure that is hidden in such graphs which are obtained from such inputs? I mean, from where are they obtained? What is the source of such graphs? The source of such graphs is sampling, the sample space, okay? The graphs constructed from that sample space, I mean, okay, I claim that they'll have large independent sets. Can anyone tell why? You all know what an independent set is, right? It's a set of vertices such that no two vertices have an edge between them. I claim that if a graph has been obtained from a good sample space, a relationship graph has been obtained from a good sample space, it'll have large independent sets in it. Exactly. So a good sample space is the one that is scattered. So it's like quite unlikely that a lot of people will know each other, right? Okay. And do you know what is the complement in graph theoretic sense of an independent set in a graph? Pardon? Okay, by an independent, okay, yeah, it's a clique. What I meant was, suppose you remove an independent set from the graph, the remaining vertices that are left, okay, they also something special, okay, there's a special name for those vertices. No, I mean, okay, maybe if I model the problem the other way. You've heard about vertex cover? Okay. So, what is a vertex cover? Okay. So, what happens if I remove suppose like these were the vertices which were covering all the edges. What happens if I just remove these vertices from the graph? What does the remaining graph look like? Pardon? Yes, I mean, if this is the vertex cover, that means whatever edges are there in the graph, they're like independent on these vertices, right? So whatever vertices remain in the graph, they better be independent. There can be no edge here, right? So if you can find a minimum vertex cover in the graph, and if you just remove it, what you're left with a maximum size independent set, and it's also vice versa. If you can find a maximum size independent set left, so obviously, if it's a maximum size independent set left, right, every other vertex which is there will have some edge incident on it, right? And that's the minimum vertex cover that you can get, okay? So coming back to our problem, we were looking at, relationship graphs that we got from good sample spaces, and we said that they have large independent sets, right? That means they have small vertex covers, right? So see, this is what we got, right? We got a small structure that is there in our graph, okay? Now, if you all know that this clique problem is NP complete. I mean, most of you would have even done a reduction from 3SAT to clique, right? Clique problem is NP complete. That means you don't expect to find an efficient algorithm. That means an algorithm running in, a sense that is feasible, right? It's not possible. But now, if I tell you, I mean, I have an algorithm that given a graph G, which has a vertex cover of size at most k, it can find a clique in time 2 pi kn. So in this paradigm, the notion of efficiency that we have is not polynomial. Okay, it's not polynomial. It's another kind of it's another kind of efficiency. It's like practical efficiency. In practical situations, what is efficiency, right? And you know that the kind of inputs that you will get to this problem will have small k, right? I mean, it's all in a particular situation, right? It'll have small k, and then isn't this kind of a running time acceptable? Because if this is small, right? This will be some small thing, some small value. At least this exponential. It's not exponential in the input. It's exponential in some parameter that is small, and that's like fine. And actually these kind of things work well in practice. And basically these are the kind of things that we'll be looking today. So we had graphs which had small structures, and we exploited those small structures to get algorithms of these kinds. Okay. Similar things can be with budgets also. Suppose I'll just take the vertex cover problem again. I mean, just a hypothetical situation. Suppose there's a big telecom company who's trying to establish itself, and it wants to place transmission towers, okay? And probably suppose this is the dummy graph that you have, and it wants to place transmission towers and vertices such that, suppose these are lanes. It's just a hypothetical example, okay? Suppose it's a lane, and there should the constraint is that there should be one tower at the end of each lane. Suppose, so it's like finding the vertex cover, right? But now if you look at practically speaking, right, the telecom, of course we know that finding the minimum vertex cover is like not feasible, it's not efficient. So, but they're not worried about the minimum thing. I mean, when they come with a proposal, they have a budget associated with them, okay? So what they're worried about is there a solution that fits my budget, right? And typically speaking, the budget will not be very much. I mean, typically in practical situations, okay? So speaking, the budget will be small, right? So even for such problem, if I can get some algorithm that runs in time, say even 2 pi k poly n, it's like fine for me. It runs polynomial in the input, and it is exponential in something, and this is where we are compromising, okay? In fact, we're really not compromising on the size of the solution or the correctness of the solution. We're in some sense cheating here, right? I mean, we're getting something in exponential, and we can't get polynomial here because it's an NP-complete problem after all. But that's fine because this parameter is small, okay? So these are the kind of things we'll be looking at today. So we'll be exploiting the additional structure which is there in the input. And how do we exploit that? So the input now to the kind of problems that we'll be looking at will consist of 2 parts. One is the classical input. For example, in a vertex cover, the classical input is a graph, right? Additionally, it will also have a parameter given to you. And then you have to design an appropriate algorithm. Appropriate algorithm for the appropriate property that has been asked for. And the kind of running time that you are allowed is not a function of n. I mean, you analyze the running time in a finer detail, and you say that the running time can be some function of k. I don't mind, but it should be polynomial in n. So this is the parameterized framework. This is like the cheat sheet. This is like another cheat sheet that we use to tackle hard problems. And again, note one thing: we are not compromising on anything. We are just cheating somewhere, right? Okay. And the algorithms that run in times of this form, which are like polynomial in the input size, but some function, and that function can be anything. Okay. At least as of now, we are not worried about. Of course, we would want the function to be small to get good solutions, but at least for the setting, we are not worried about that. Such problems are called fixed parameter tractable problems, FPT. Okay. Now we'll just jump to a problem and we'll try to develop an FPT algorithm for it. So the problem is a bar fight prevention problem. The setting is like this. There's a small town, so there are folks there. There is a small party place, and there's this one party place in the small town, and you are the manager. Okay, this is the setting. So what's the problem? The problem is these are humans, and therefore there are rivalries. I mean, obvious things, right? So these edges represent the rivalries between people, okay? And you as a manager don't want any chaos to happen inside the hall, okay? Obvious reasons. So what is it that you want to do? You want to allow only those set of people such that, it's exactly this one, right? You want to allow only those set of people such that they do not involve in a possible conflict. So it's like at the entry only, and so since the town is small, suppose you know who is friend with whom and all those things are like, so this input graph is like known to you, okay? So at the entry itself, you want to reject some people such that the number of people who are allowed inside form an independent set, or they do not involve in conflicts. Okay, so as we figured out, so I've just modeled it as a graph problem, and as we figured out, it's nothing but a minimum vertex, a vertex cover problem, right? So these are the people, these red ones are the people that you reject at the entry, right? And whatever you allow inside, they do not have conflicts amongst themselves. Okay. Now, as we know, the minimum vertex cover is like is NP hard, and therefore the only kind of algorithm that we can expect under the P not equal to NP conjecture is a 2 per n algorithm. And even for values of n like say 1000, which is like not too much at least, you'll have to run the algorithm for these many times, which is like these many possibilities. And can anyone tell how much time will such an evaluation take? It's like you don't know. Okay, maybe that day you're like sitting in heaven, chilling out, and then maybe your algorithm is like suddenly telling you that okay, you finally got an answer. Okay. But okay, the manager is smart enough, he knows that it's not possible, but he's practical. He's like, fine, I don't want a minimum thing, but I don't want to reject more than k people, because I mean, after all, even I have to live in the city, right? Even I have to live in the town. I don't want to reject more than k people, and obviously I don't want to reject more than k people because I don't want to lose more on business. And that's a very fine thing to do. And obviously this k thing that he wants to reject cannot be very huge, right? He doesn't want, practically speaking, he doesn't want to reject a lot of people, right? So this is like the structure in the graph, the structure in the problem that we have, right? The kind of problem that we are dealing in. Okay. Again, this is NP complete. Okay. What is like the naive kind of thing that you can do to get a k-sized vertex cover in a graph? The naive. You have a graph on n vertices. I'm not bounding you with any time constraints, okay? You have a graph on n vertices. What is the naive thing that you can do? Okay, but that's again, it's heuristic, right? You need to prove that it will always give you such a procedure will always give you a vertex cover of, if there's a vertex cover size k, you'll always get a vertex cover size. I mean, just a very naive thing, okay, very naive thing. What will you do? Like a kind of brute force. Take out each vertex from?
Take out the one vertex from each edge.
But which vertex? No, but I'm sorry. What was the claim? What is the claim again? Yeah.
And for each edge, I take out one vertex from it.
No, but how can you say you can take any vertex from the graph? Maybe the vertex that you take is okay. I mean, we'll come to such kind of a thing, but you can't take any vertex at least. Greater than? Okay, I mean, you're really looking at, very advanced. I'm just looking for a very, very, very naive solution. But yeah, let me answer this question first. Okay, I choose this edge, okay. I take this edge and I decide to pick this vertex in my solution, okay. But probably the optimal solution was like take this vertex and this vertex. Maybe there is a vertex cover, suppose you were looking for a vertex cover size 2, okay. And you choose to pick, you saw this edge, you choose to pick this vertex, okay. Now, in this graph, can you get a vertex cover of size 1 now? But this graph has a vertex cover of size 2, right, which is this and this. So, you can't just pick any vertex, I mean, we'll come to it, but yeah. That's again a heuristic, right? Take both the vertices, like again, you're doing kind of approximation. I mean, maybe both the vertices are not in the solution. In this example, these both vertices are not. Okay. I mean, okay. I'm looking for a brute force algorithm, guys. Pardon? Yes. I mean, give me this thing. Come on. It's like you try all and choose k sub 6. I mean. we'll come to all those things, take which vertex, take one vertex and all those things, but we're not worried about those things right now, okay? And at least from such a thing, you can get an algorithm that runs in time order n of k, right? But then of course it's not a very good algorithm. Even when k is like 10, at most 10, this will result in these many possibilities, and it's at least better than what we had earlier, but even with the modern supercomputers that we have right now, it's not feasible to do it in a single day. So we'll try to improve it now. Okay, now I think now we'll start the FPT journey. Now we'll try to exploit the additional input structure that we have on graphs, okay? So I had this graph, okay? So what is the first thing that you do? Suppose you have a lot of books around you, okay? There is a lot, I mean, you have a lot of things around you and you don't know which way to go. What is the kind of things that you try to do, I mean, generally speaking? Yeah, I mean, in a general setting of speaking, I mean, if you have a lot of things around you, you just try to get rid of some things which are like not going to be useful, or if something is going to be useful, just take it and keep it aside, right? I mean, it's kind of pre-processing, right? I'm not solving the problem really, but I'm trying to pre-process the graph. I'm just trying to get rid of what is not important to me, and what is really important to me, I'll just keep it aside, that kind of a thing, okay? Okay. Now, I'll just highlight some vertices. Look at the green vertices. What's so special about these green vertices, except for the fact that they're green? Pardon? Yes. So they don't have any conflicts with them, right? So I can just allow them inside, right? Without any rejection. Okay. Next. Look at this colored set of vertices. Suppose, just for the sake of illustration, suppose my k was like 4. That means I was looking for a vertex cover of size at most 4 in my graph. So the problem is like this: if you have a vertex cover of size at most k, you give me the vertex cover. If you don't have, you just say no, right? Okay, this is the problem. So your k here is 4 and you have a degree like this. What do you think should be done with such a vertex? Note that it has how many neighbors? 5 neighbors, right? So what should be done? Pardon? Yes. I mean, I can't afford to not reject it. Why? Because what I want is, I want a final graph where there are no conflicts, right? If I don't reject this vertex, right, how do I remove these conflicts? I'll have to remove these conflicts by taking all these vertices, right? Which exceeds my budget. So if there is a solution of size k in my graph, then that better pick this vertex, right? So again, I can pre-process it. I can just delete this vertex, right, which is like this, and then I can decrease my budget by 1. I say that, okay, there's one person that I'm sure he'll be in my reject list, okay? And then now you got some isolated vertices, you can just remove them, right? And then again you find another high degree vertex in your graph, which is like this. This again is a high degree vertex. Again, same thing is to be done with it. Remove this vertex, and you're left with this graph, okay? Now let us see what have we done till now. We haven't done anything fancy as of now. We've just removed the isolated vertices and we've just rejected all the vertices of degree at least k plus 1. And note that both these operations were like linear time or polynomial time in n, right? So they were not expensive operations. Okay. But after doing this, what is the kind of graph that I'm left with? I'm left with a graph where every vertex has degree at most k. Now every vertex is a bounded degree, okay? And at least 1, so there are no isolated vertices. And what is my remaining budget? Suppose x number of vertices got removed due to this operation, so the remaining budget is like k minus x, right? Now I'll not be doing anything fancy with the graph, but I'll just be analyzing the graph now, okay? So now my remaining budget is k minus x vertices, right? You know that a vertex cover covers all the edges of the graph, right? There are k minus x vertices, and I know that the degree of each vertex is at most k, right? So how many edges can k minus x vertices together be incident on? It cannot be more than k into k minus x, right? Because the degree is bounded by k. Every vertex sees k things, and there are k minus x things, so it cannot be more than this. And therefore, if the input is a yes instance, by which I mean suppose there is a graph, suppose the graph had a vertex cover of size k minus, the preprocessed graph had a vertex cover of size k minus x, suppose this was the case, then if the whatever preprocessed graph that you have, okay, you just count the number of edges in that graph. If the number of edges happen to be greater than k into k minus x, is there any way that you can find k minus x size vertex cover in this graph? Note, the budget is k minus x, every vertex can cover at most k edges, right? So the total number of edges that can be covered by all the vertices together is not more than k into k minus x. And I know the property of the vertex cover is that all the edges are incident on those vertices. So if the total number of edges in my graph are like greater than k into k minus x, I can just say no, right? Otherwise my graph has these many vertices, which means these many edges. That means the number of vertices cannot be more than twice the number of edges, right? At max, worst case, all the edges could be independent, right? So what is special about this thing that we have? Now we have a preprocessed graph, and the number of vertices in that graph is like bounded by this number. And if you observe this number is like strictly a function of k, right? X are just the number of vertices which were removed. Suppose even if there were no vertices which were removed, the number of vertices are like at most 2k square, right? And now I can do my favorite brute force algorithm on this. I mean, this is just for fun's sake, okay? So main thing is asymptotically, what am I getting? I'm getting an algorithm that runs in this much time. To be more precise, I'm getting an algorithm that runs in like the function is k power order of k, because this is like k power 2k kind of an algorithm, right? So asymptotically I've got what I wanted, right? It's just that the number of checks that are required to make are still huge, okay? I mean, I can solve it on a supercomputer, but it will still take half a day on a supercomputer, so I just want to improve more. Note that we've already got an FPT algorithm, now we're just trying to improve the algorithm, okay? So a mild improvement can be made by observing one more observation, by making one more observation, which is, look at this red-green pair, okay? What can you say about this pair in the graph? Pardon? Yeah, one of them will always, that is true for any age, right? For any age, one of them will always be there. But what is special about this pair? I mean, this green and this pair that I've pointed out. Okay. Do you observe that this green has a conflict only with red? It has conflicts with nothing else, okay? So I know from this edge, like now as you pointed out, right? From every edge, I have to pick one vertex. In such a situation, I can say that it's okay if I always pick the red vertex. Why? Because I know to kill this conflict, I have to pick one of them, right? If I pick green, right? I mean, I'll just be killing this thing, right? But I can be greedy here. I mean, it's like if I pick red, I'll do the same task, same thing that was done by green. Plus, I might be doing something extra, right? So in such situations, I can simply choose to reject red and take green. So the observation is from every edge I have to pick something, and in such an edge where one of the vertices is degree 1, right? I can choose its neighbor, because whatever work this was doing, its neighbor was also doing, and maybe potentially more. So it's like if there is a vertex cover which had this vertex, right? I can just remove this vertex from the vertex cover and can put this vertex, and that will still be a vertex cover of the same size. So with this observation, we apply this rule. We delete the neighbor of a degree 1 vertex. We remove this red vertex, and then this becomes isolated, and then I can just remove it. Decrease the budget by 1. And then you do it for every 1 degree thing. Okay. This is another pair. I do it for all the pairs. It's kind of boring now. Okay, so what have we done till now? We've just applied 3 rules, right? And we've done nothing fancy till now. We just removed the isolated vertices because they had no business. We just rejected all the vertices which indulged in more than k fights, right? Which again, we had to do, right? We didn't have an option. And then for every 1 degree, for any vertex, for any person that had just 1 conflict, I'll just allow him and disallow the person with whom it was conflicting. Okay. This is now the preprocessed graph. Again, we'll analyze. We have done all these 3 things as we mentioned, and now all these things have been done in polynomial time. And now again we have the same thing. Every vertex has bounded degree, has degree at most k, and it's at least 2 now because I've removed all degree 1 vertices from my graph, right? It's exactly the same except for this point. Now the degree is at least 2. I mean, I've not made a huge difference, but it was just a simple observation that. And suppose, okay. Now suppose y were the number of vertices which are removed during the during this process of degree 1 things. Now suppose that these many vertices can kill at most these many edges. Again the same thing. Suppose there was a vertex cover of size k minus x minus y, then if the graph has these greater than these edges, I can just say no. Otherwise, the graph has less than these many edges, and therefore I have a small size graph. It's just that in this case, the number of vertices will not be twice the number of edges. It will be at most the number of edges. It's a small exercise. You can just prove it that if a graph has minimum degree at least 2, then the number of vertices is at most the number of edges. Okay. Then again, I'll do this same brute force. Asymptotically, I've done nothing better, okay? It's like, it was 2k squared, choose k, I'm just getting this. It's just that now this can be done, it doesn't require a supercomputer to run. It can be done on your laptop. Probably it will take half a day, but it can be done. So, but asymptotically, nothing better. It's still the same. Okay. This process was called, the procedure that we did is called kernelization. It's like, what have we done? We've just pre-processed that data, right? In a sense, we had a huge data, and we have been able to take a kernel out of it. A kernel, for example, in operating systems, right, you have a kernel which is like the core of the operating system. So in some sense, what we have got at the end was a core, right? But now again, after pre-processing, we were like happy because we saw that the pre-processed input now has size which is just a function of k. So we happily applied brute force, right? But then, can we do something better than brute force? Okay. So again, here we'll come to your point. So here again, the point is every conflict has to be removed. So we know for sure that at least one of the vertices have to be picked, right? But which one, I don't know. So someone, I don't know whether it's there or not. Someone in the very first theory lecture pointed out there is a technique called branch and bound, right? Which is, so we'll be using that kind of a technique to do it. We'll be branching, but the branch, and the branching will be bounded to a certain depth. So, for example, we have this graph. Now, suppose I have to decide the fate of this edge, right? I know one of U or V has to be there. Which one? I don't know. What is the naive thing that you do? I mean, in approximation, like you just pick both the vertices, right? Because you it was okay for you to take a 2 approximate solution. But here you cannot pick both, but you have to pick one, right? What do? You just branch on both the possibilities. I mean, so this was your original graph G, okay? You had a budget K. You know one of either U or V has to be in my solution, okay? Okay, so you make 2 recursive calls to the same function. It's like recursion. In one call, you send this instance. You just remove U. You suppose you've decided to pick U, okay, and you decrease this budget by 1. You send this instance to one routine, and you send this instance to the other routine, right? And you know for sure that if there is a k size instance in your original graph, one of these routines will say yes, right? It's like now I'm not picking anything arbitrary. I'm checking on both cases. One of the things, if there is a solution, one of the things will report yes for sure. This is all I know, and I'll just do it recursively. For this graph now, I'll just pick any edge in this graph, right? I know any vertex cover has to cover this edge. I'll just branch on both the possibilities, and finally I'll get a tree, right? So if there is a vertex cover in my graph, there will be one path from the root to the leaf that will actually stop. And the good thing is, in each branch my k is decreasing, right? So I can't go beyond k levels, right? So the branch in this sense is bounded. So how many how many instances do you have to run? I mean, what is this? What is the recurrence relation for this thing? So you have this instance where so what is decreasing first of all, okay? So when you normally do recursion, you have an instance of size n, and then you just split it up into 2 instances of smaller size. But here it's not the instance really that's in some sense decreasing. Here what's decreasing is the branch, this budget k, right? So I had this, suppose I had this instance, right? From each instance I'm creating 2 instances of which have budget k minus 1, and the branching depth, I mean, this solves to 2 per k, but even intuitively, at every step you are making 2 branches, and the depth cannot be more than k, so you cannot have more than 2 per k instances, okay? And so what are the total number of operations that are required? So it's just 2 per k, and in every instance, what are you doing? In every instance, you're just checking whether, what are you doing? You're just checking whether the remaining graph has an edge or not. If there is an edge, you just pick that edge. If there is no edge, you just report that you've already got a vertex cover, right? So that can be done in linear time, linear in the number of edges and the vertices. So it's like the total number of operations are 2 per k into nm. And suppose we were doing this on the preprocessed input, so we know that the number of edges and the number of vertices both are bounded by k square, and we get something like this. And this is just like a fraction of seconds operation on your laptop. So we've actually achieved something which is practical, and even asymptotically we have achieved something. We have achieved something from k power order k to a 2 per k algorithm, right? Okay. So this technique was bounded search tree technique. Okay. Having said all this, so we just saw some FPT algorithms. Now we'll see another things which are there in this parameterized framework, which are necessary. I mean, we'll see a problem and we'll just come to it. We'll just keep the suspense there. So there's this new problem. It's again adapted from the previous version, the bad problem. Now the manager doesn't want to refuse anyone, okay? And he doesn't even want any fights. But then he has to compromise somewhere, okay? So he compromises on the fact saying that, okay, I'll buy k minus 1 more bars. I'll buy k minus 1 more bars. And then what is his strategy? He's like, every night he'll have this graph. He'll try to partition the people into, you know, bunches, k bunches. Now he has a total of k bars, right? He had one priorly and now k minus 1 more. he'll try to bunch people in groups of, he'll try to bunch people into K groups such that each group in itself has no conflicts, right? So it's like, so suppose K was again 4, he bought, okay, suppose K was 3. So there are like 3 bars now. Now he tries to put some people here, some people here, some people here, such that inter bars there can be conflicts, but intra bar there are no conflicts, okay? So what kind of a problem is this? Can you think of a graph theoretic problem that's been modeled here? Pardon? Coloring, yes. So you know what a K coloring of a graph is? Can you color the vertices of a graph with K colors such that every endpoint of an edge gets different color, right? So if a graph is K colorable, you can actually split it into K size, K independent sets like this, right? I mean, you just take, suppose the graph is K colorable, so suppose you've colored the graph with K colors properly, right? You just pick all the vertices of the same color. The claim is they'll form an independent set. They will, right? Because they have the same color, so they can't have an edge between them. So you can get K independent sets from those K colors, and independent sets there can be edges, but inside there will be no, because they have the same color. Similarly, if you have a K, if you can partition your graph into K independent sets, right? Then you can K color it, because you can just give same colors, one color to one independent set, right? So it's basically the K coloring problem. Okay. Okay. Now the thing is, can you help the management now? The management was like happy because we gave them an FPT algorithm earlier, which was like practical. Again, the management is like, okay, fine, I'm ready to accept an FPT algorithm for this. Can you design an FPT algorithm for this problem? I'll give you a hint. The hint is this 3 vertex coloring, which is the problem which says that asks whether a graph can be colored using 3 colors or not. This problem is NP complete, even for 3. Okay, that means you cannot do it in polynomial time. You cannot decide in polynomial time whether a graph is 3 colorable or not. Now, can you answer the management with some appropriate answer? The management is asking you for an FPT algorithm for a K vertex coloring problem, and the 3 vertex coloring problem is NP complete. Okay, what is an FPT algorithm? What kind of running time will an FPT algorithm give you? Pardon? F of k into polynomial of in polynomial of n, right? Now I also know for sure, I mean, the 3 vertex coloring is NP complete. So therefore I don't expect a polynomial time algorithm for this thing, right? Now suppose you came up with an FPT algorithm. What happens then? Suppose somehow we came up with an algorithm that ran in this much time for this problem, right? What happens then? Pardon? 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 I mean, I'm just telling you that the 3 vertex coloring is an NP complete problem, okay? So, and this just means that 3 vertex coloring cannot be done in polynomial time, okay? Now, if you can solve K vertex coloring in this much time, then what happens? Yeah, this is good, but the claim is, can you solve it? This is what I'm asking. I mean, I've not yet given you an algorithm, okay? I'm just asking you, what happens if you solve this? If you solve this, I mean, are you kind of, you should kind of get a contradiction somewhere in this whole thing. How? Yeah. And the important point is I've solved K vertex problem in this much time, right? This is just a function in K, right? So just put K equal to 3, okay? So using this algorithm, I'll just try running this algorithm for this problem for k equal to 3. For k equal to 3, it's a 3 vertex coloring problem. But I have an FPT algorithm. I don't have any arbitrary algorithm. I have an FPT algorithm that has this much time. Now, if suppose you run it for k equal to 3, what is this time? It's polynomial, right? So, can you have this kind of an algorithm for k vertex coloring problem? Yes, no? Do you see a contradiction? Do you see a contradiction? If you have an FPT algorithm, that means you have an algorithm that runs in time which is like this, okay? And if it runs in time like this, then for 3 vertex coloring, if you just put k equal to 3, this is just some constant thing. I mean, it could be any function, but it's just a constant thing, right? And yeah, I mean, basically we'll have to say that P is equal to NP for that matter. Or as Arnav sir pointed out, that you are the pop then. Right? So this cannot happen unless P equal to NP, right? So what do we conclude? Come on, please. What do we conclude? Can we have an FPT algorithm for k vertex coloring problem? No. Okay. It turns out even you cannot have such an algorithm, this n power k kind of an algorithm. For example, for vertex cover, you could, the naive algorithm that we saw, take all k size subsets of the vertices, right? And we saw an n choose k algorithm, right? Take all k size subsets for vertex cover, take all k size subsets and do. And that was an n power k algorithm. For k vertex coloring, I cannot even have such an algorithm. Why? Because again, if I have such an algorithm again, if I solve it for 3 vertex coloring, I'll have an algorithm that runs in time n to the g of 3. G is just some function and 3 is just a constant. So g of 3 is just a constant. And then I'll have n power some constant algorithm, which is nothing but a polynomial time algorithm for 3 vertex coloring again. Right? So I cannot even expect to have this kind of an algorithm for vertex coloring. And basically the problems which exhibit these kind of running times can also be classified into a separate class, and that class is called XP. So this problem is not even in XP. Okay, so we'll come to it. So not all polynomial, not all NP complete problems are FPT. But yes, sad for some time, but we should not actually be sad. I mean, we are researchers, okay? So we get problems, we are in business, so it's like a good thing for us, we have something to discover, okay? Having said that, the crucial point of this argument is this: we try to show that something is not FPT using the fact that something was NP complete. I mean, we borrowed this NP completeness kind of things to claim that something is FPT, to claim that something is not FPT, right? But can I always do it? For example, to claim that something is not polynomial time in the original hierarchy, what do? I just say that, okay, I try to reduce it to an NP complete problem and then say that because this NP complete problem cannot have a polynomial time solution, I cannot expect a polynomial time solution for this kind of a problem. I mean, this is how I exclude things from being in NP, from being in P, right, in the classical setting. But here, do I need a similar kind of a notion for this theory also, or is the NP hardness theory itself sufficient to prove that something is not FPT? Okay, we'll just see another problem. I think it should be somewhat clear. So okay, so again the problem is now this. So it's like this thing, the fight prevention things all have been done. Now suddenly the manager is scared about another issue. He's like, the town is small, and if people are friends with each other, they're like very strong friends, okay? So if suppose there are like k set of people who are like mutually friends with each other, and if suppose on some night I rejected one of them, right, they'll all be like mad at me and then I'm gone. And somehow he knows martial arts and he's like, okay, I can handle k-1 people, but k people I cannot handle. So this was just a hypothetical whatever this thing, but the thing is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a k clique in a graph. Okay. Okay. I'm trying to find a k-clique in the graph. Okay. Now, what is the status of a k-clique problem? I mean, is it FPT? Can we say that it is FPT or can we not? So, as for k vertex coloring, right, we knew that for any, even for k equal to 3, we cannot have a polynomial time algorithm, okay? So, can we say something here? I mean, k vertex coloring was not even xp, right? It was not xp, and therefore we said for any constant value of k, it's not polynomial, right? So, what about this problem? Is this problem xp? I mean, can you get, can you find a k-clique in time n par k? Pardon? Pardon? Yeah, it is NP complete. I'm asking you whether it is an XP, by which I mean, can you find an algorithm that runs in time n par some function of k? I mean, for example, in vertex cover we had, right, we checked all k size subsets of n, right? It was n choose k, and therefore we got an n par k algorithm. So can I do something similar here? Can I get an n par k algorithm for this problem? Okay. What did you do in vertex cover? How did you check whether there is a vertex cover in n par k time? Anyone? How did you check whether there is a vertex cover of size k in n par k time in vertex cover? Pardon? We didn't start that. You started it, but what was the naive thing? We checked all subsets of size k, right? Which was n choose k, which is order nk. This is how we do it, right? Okay, in 3 coloring that cannot be done, okay? In 3 coloring, this coloring problem, right? Coloring problem cannot be solved like this. If you're trying to find out a k coloring, you choose a subset of k vertices, but what do you do then? I mean, so it's not possible that way. But can you do something similar in this problem? K-clique problem? Yes. So brute force, this kind of a brute force thing works here, right? So you can find an n choose k algorithm. You just pick a k size subset, check whether there's a edge between every pair. I mean, it's a k size subset. How many edges can there be? They cannot be more than k square edges, right? So for every k size subset, you're doing a k square time operation. And how many k size subsets are there? It's n choose k operations, right? So you can get an algorithm that runs in time n choose k. So this problem is very well in XP, right? So now, at least the way I said that coloring is not FPT, I can't use the same argument here. Why? Because I can't say that it's not FPT because 3-clique is not polynomial time, because 3-clique, I can actually solve 3-clique in polynomial time, right? So if k was 3, right, I'll use the same algorithm and I mean I'll get an n cube algorithm, right? So I cannot say that this 3-clique problem is not polynomial. What was the contradiction there? The 3 vertex coloring was not polynomial, right? It was NP complete. It was not polynomial. Therefore, okay. We said if we can get this algorithm, we got a contradiction saying that I'll get a polynomial time algorithm for 3 vertex coloring, right? This was the contradiction that we got in this case. What's it? We're not saying that we know that, okay? Okay, yeah. Yeah, because this we know, this we don't know whether there's an FPT algorithm, but this we know for sure. So one of them is wrong. This cannot be wrong because this we know is right. So so we cannot have this algorithm, right? This is what we know. But now for the k-click problem, right? I don't have any such claim saying that k-click is NP complete, because I just gave you an algorithm, an n par k algorithm for solving a k-click. I mean, I'm not saying that k-click is I'm not saying here in that problem, I'm not saying that 3-click is NP complete. Click problem is an NP complete problem, but 3-click, I mean, if the problem is just find a 3-click, I mean, you just pick every set of 3 vertices, right? How much time does it take? It just take n cube time, which is polynomial. And that's fine, okay, but here strangely even with a constant 3 it is NP complete. I mean, basically you'll have to check for every partition of n vertices into 3 parts, which is like 3 par n algorithm in this case, okay. So clearly we can apply a similar we can apply a similar reasoning for ruling out FPT in this problem, okay. But the fact is that even this problem doesn't admit an FPT algorithm, okay. But yes, the reasoning is not the same. The reasoning doesn't follow from NP, the theory of NP completeness, okay. And to account for the fixed parameter intractability of problems, right, we need to develop a different theory for this model again. Can I take 5 minutes more? Okay, we'll just finish up on this note now. Okay, so I mean I can't rely upon NP completeness to prove that things are not FPT, okay. Some cases fine, but it cannot be done in every case, okay. So similar to the theory of similar to the classical complexity model that we have, we also have a model in this parameterized setting, okay. So remember this thing that we saw in the very first slide. Right? So similar to these classes, I also have corresponding classes in this setting. I mean, see, now the paradigm is completely different. Here for me efficient computation was P, right? But in this setting, for me efficient, at least practically efficient computation is FPT, right? There we said that there are some problems which are at least not known to be polynomial, right? A similar kind of class, similar to what NP is for P, the class for FPT is actually XP. In a sense, I mean, okay, now whatever I'm going to say now is gonna be vague because I'll not be proving things. They're like, it involves Turing machine reductions and all kind of things, but I'm just giving you an idea about what it is. I'm just telling you that similar to this, there is also a model here. Okay, so this is the XP. As we know, these are the kind of problems which we know are accepted by a non-deterministic Turing machine. Okay. Similarly, XP are the problems that are accepted, that are accepted by a Turing machine, which is bound to take not more than k steps. It's called a short Turing machine problem. So similar to similar to a Turing machine, non-deterministic Turing machine model here, I have a short non-deterministic Turing machine model here. So it's like going parallelly. And now, I mean, how was this developed? Okay, there was this class P, and there were some problems which are not known to be in P, right? Similarly, we have this class FPT, and there are some problems which are XP. I mean, there are some problems which have running time this, but I don't know whether I can make them FPT or not, right? For example, vertex cover had running time this, and I can make it FPT, right? But click has running time this, but at least I'm claiming, at least take my word for it, I cannot make it FPT. And there's some problems like coloring, right? They're not even XP, there's some beyond it, right? We just showed that there is no XP algorithm for it. So I mean, there is also a model like this for such classes. Again, so how was the first NP-hard problem chosen? You know, the first NP-hard problem was 3-SAT, right? Normally, when we have to prove something, we have to prove if something is hard, how do we go about it? We start with an existing NP-hard problem and we reduce, what do we reduce? We reduce this to our problem, right? So we do this reduction, right? But the first NP-hard problem was not chosen this way. There is actually a reduction from Turing machines to 3-SAT. Okay, from non-deterministic Turing machine to 3-SAT, okay. And the vague idea is, since every NP problem is the problem that is identified by some non-deterministic Turing machine, the reduction goes like this. There is some reduction from some kind of a non-deterministic Turing machine to 3-SAT in polynomial time, and doing this reduction we can compute that since every NP problem can be modeled like this, therefore every NP problem can be reduced to 3-SAT. So the main idea of that meta theorem is this, and this is how we got our first NP-hard problems from where we started, okay. Similarly, similar to that concept, we also have something here. So as I said, the model for this is a short Turing machine, okay. So there is a reduction starting from short Turing machine that reduces to independent set parameterized by k, where k is the solution size, right, like we saw it for vertex cover, okay. So we actually have a reduction like this, and what does it say? It says that every problem that can be modeled like this, which is basically all these XP problems, right, they can be reduced to independent set on this, and this is what is believed, okay, that these problems cannot be the problems which are accepted by this short deterministic Turing short non-deterministic Turing machine, they cannot be solved in time better than this. This is like the assumption, okay, and for that matter there is this assumption here also. I mean, why aren't we able to prove that P is not equal to NP? Because precisely we believe that the time that non-deterministic Turing machines take to accept a language are exponential, right? We don't know whether it's exponential or not, and that's what has kept this claim unresolved, okay. The day we know that non-deterministic Turing machines can do computations in polynomial time, we are done with the claim, right? Because NP is exactly the class of problems which are solved, which are recognized by non-deterministic Turing machines. Similarly, so analogous to this assumption, there is this assumption here that this cannot be, can be done in this much time, okay? And therefore, we cannot expect independent set to have an FPT algorithm, because if this had an FPT algorithm and this is the polynomial time reduction, this would have an FPT this thing, right? So there is an analogous theory here, and you know that you can convert independent set, you can reduce independent set to a clique, right, by preserving the same parameter, and therefore if this cannot have an FPT, I mean even this cannot have an FPT algorithm, right? So I mean the thing is that there is an analogous theory, corresponding theory associated with this field also, and the concept of and there is a concept of hard problems here also, okay. But there is just one slight difference, and that's the last point, I promise. The difference is all the hard problems for this class are together contained in a class which is called NP hard, right? What do I mean when I say that they're together contained in a class? That means all the problems have equal level, as in if there are two problems P and Q in NP hard, I can reduce P to Q and I can also reduce Q to P. This is it, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case here. There are a lot of hard problems here, but there are hierarchies. So those hierarchies we call, like there is this hierarchy, there is this class of hard problems which are W1 hard, okay. I mean this is very intuitive, okay. I mean it has a lot of details, but it's very intuitive. Why I'm mentioning it is just to tell you that we have actually developed a model which is analogous to the previous model, okay. And we can do whatever we could do here, we can do the same things here. We can do reductions here, we can prove that things cannot be FPT using the same model and stuff like that. And then There are like different levels of hardness here. Okay. So all these problems are hard, which means if you solve any one of them in FPT time, then everything will be solved in FPT time. But it's just that a problem here can be reduced to a problem here, but a problem here cannot be reduced to a problem here. Okay. So this is like the broad idea, and okay, with this note, so this is like the classes, the corresponding classes. The last thing, okay, the last thing, what keeps this model intact is this assumption, right? What keeps this model intact? I mean, what makes sure that W1 hard problems cannot have an FPT algorithm? I mean, it's basically this thing, right? So the underlying like this is the underlying conjecture that is that holds this, right? The underlying conjecture that holds this model is this exponential time hypothesis. This is again a conjecture. It's just a hypothesis which says that you cannot solve 2SAT in worst case in time which is 2 power little o of n. That means anything smaller than n. We know of 2 power n algorithms, right? So this has not been proved, but this is just conjectured, okay? But again, like a lot of people believe in this, a lot of people believe in this also. And then we have a theorem which says that if W1 hard becomes equal to FPT, then ETH will fail. And because people don't expect ETH to fail, we believe that this is the model. Okay. Thank you, and I'm sorry for the delay. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruhani. We now disperse for a short coffee break and resume the talks at 4. So please be back by 4. And
Thank you so much. I'm really sorry for the delay.
How do we close this then?
Do you know how I open it?